Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Minister Varadkar, Consul General Kilkenny, Senator Blumenthal, Kathy Malloy, the First Lady of Connecticut, Stephen Darden, State Representative, Brendan Sharkey, Majority Leader, soon to be Speaker, and our Mayor, Mayor Scott Jackson. On behalf of Quinnipiac University, it's a pleasure for me to welcome all of you here today for this very exciting event, the dedication of our new MUSAEM an GHORTA MHÓIR, Ireland's Great Hunger Museum. With the dedication of this museum, Quinnipiac will continue, indeed strengthen, our efforts to educate people in this country and indeed throughout the world about the true causes and consequences of Ireland's great hunger. We also hope this wonderful museum, this beautiful facility, will help educate people about the great quality of Irish art, something that I think is underappreciated on a world stage. This project really began 15 years ago in 1997, when I was asked to be the Grand Marshal of the New York City St. Patrick's Day Parade. And in accepting that honor, I wanted to commit to dedicating that parade to Ireland's great hunger. It coincided with the 150th anniversary of the worst year of the Great Irish Famine, which occurred between 1845 and 1852. But the worst year is typically referred to as Black 47, 1847. So in 1997, it was the 150th anniversary. So I dedicated the parade that year to the Great Hunger. And fortunately, Murray Lender, Quinnipiac graduate and member of our Board of Trustees, heard many of the speeches that I gave during that time and read the news accounts about the Great Hunger. And about 6 months after the parade was over, I was talking to Murray about a gift for our new library. And he told me, John, you know, the Great Hunger story is just such a compelling, important story. And he said, you know, I grew up in New Haven here, and I lived in a large Jewish community, but right next door was a very large Irish community. I never heard a word about the Great Hunger. He said, why was that the case? And so we talked about that, and finally he said, well, look, John, as you know, I'm going to give you a gift for the new library, and not only that, I'll get my brother Marvin to match my gift. But I want the gift to go to creating a room in that library dedicated to the Great Hunger, so that Quinnipiac and you in particular and the resources of our history department can continue the education process about the Great Hunger. And so in the year 2000, we actually dedicated that room. It's the Lender family special collection room on Ghorta Móir, which continues to this day. And Murray was so supportive of our efforts to educate people about the Great Hunger. I'm pleased he was there in 2000 for that dedication. Christine Keneally, who will be speaking later, an outstanding Irish historian, spoke on that occasion. And Murray, just 2 years ago, was proud, along with his wife Gilly, to go down to New York, the Consul General's offices in New York, as we displayed about 15 or 20 pieces that are in this building today. So I knew he had a great sense about what we were doing and how important this project was. Unfortunately, we lost Murray March 21st, and so he's not here with us today, but I have to think that he would be very proud that we're dedicating this building today, and we're so pleased and honored that his wife, Gilly, is with us at this time, and I would ask Gilly to please just stand and be recognized. So I want to make sure the official record is correct. That's particularly important since the correct history of the Great Hunger was not always told, certainly not originally until we had people like Christine Keneally and Cecil Woodham Smith write a more accurate history. And the record should show that while many Irish Americans and many Irish contributed to this wonderful day and this great facility, if it were not for the son of Jewish immigrants from Poland, we would not be here today celebrating this wonderful building. I'd now like to introduce to one of our first speakers about the Great Hunger and the collection. I mentioned Christine Keneally. There have been two great books on the Great Hunger. The Great Hunger by Cecil Woodham Smith, and we're so honored that her daughter is here with us today, That book was published in 1962, I believe, and it was the first rewrite of a more accurate portrayal of the Great Hunger. Christine Keneally wrote her book, This Great Calamity, in 1995. And for me, it was my intellectual awakening about the Great Hunger. I read that book in 1996, and for the first time, I really appreciated the true and accurate picture about what took place in Ireland during that mid-19th century. So please join me in recognizing a great Irish historian. I'm pleased to say that she's going to be a visiting professor here at Quinnipiac in our College of Arts and Sciences this spring. Please join me in welcoming Christine Keneally.
I'm sort of short. Before the famine, you might know the Irish people were the tallest people in Europe. And I sort of challenge my students to say, how do we as historians know that? And they say, oh, coffins, clothes, door levels. No, it's much more mundane. We know because the Irish were such a presence in the constabulary and in the British Army, and they had to be tall. So we know Irish people, oh, and convict records. They were there, so we know that Irish people were tall. After the famine, unfortunately, one of the longer-term consequences of hunger, malnutrition, is size. So after the famine, Irish people were no longer the tallest people in Europe. So I was asked to speak today briefly about world famine and what our famine means. So again, I always challenge my students, what is famine? Famine is never simply about food shortages. Famine is always about political decisions. The same is true today as it was in the 1840s. There were more famines in the 20th century than in any previous century. In a world of instantaneous communication, of plentiful food, of the end of empire, how can this be? How can we stand by and let people die? Yet, even within this landscape of human misery, the Irish famine, the Great Hunger, AnGhorta Mhóir, the bad years, call it what you want, the outcome is the same, remains a grim uniqueness. The population loss sustained in the Great Hunger, proportionate to his population, remained higher than in any modern famine. Moreover, the Irish population remains lower today than it was 160 years ago. No other country in the world has that demographic history. Quite simply, Ireland never recovered from the trauma of those years. Amartya Sen, who is now a professor of economics at Oxford University, is a survivor of the Bengal famine of 1943. Sorry, I'm a 19th century historian. I always, even on my checks, I write 1943. As a child, Sen witnessed vast amounts of food being shipped out of India to feed people in Britain while his people starved. To Irish people, this image is familiar. In the years after 1845, vast amounts of food continued to leave Ireland, while hundreds of thousands of people died for want of this same food. Even more poignantly, this food was shipped on the same vessels as the people who fled to the ports of Glasgow, Liverpool, Cardiff, and London. But there was one difference. The transport of food was regulated. Every pig or sheep that died on board a ship mattered. If a person died, it didn't matter. Amartya Sen has devoted his academic life to developing a theory of famine. He concludes, 1, famine is not about food shortages. It is about entitlement. Put more simply, if you believe that poor people have a right to assistance, they will not die. 2, he believes government regulation is needed. Without regulation, the food shortages will be exploited by some to make profits. And 3, he argues, famines never occur in real democracies. Think about it. Sen's arguments are as relevant today as they were for Ireland in the 1840s. Finally, how many people died during the Irish famine? The bottom line is, we don't know. There is a consensus amongst Irish historians that it was over 1 million people out of a population of 8 million people. I often say over 1 million people died, an even higher number emigrated. I say it all the time. Other historians say it. But it is a cold, convenient statistic that does not do justice to the callousness of the British government, who refused, when challenged, to keep records of the numbers who died. Nor does this statistic do honour to those who died slow, painful, tortured deaths, coffinless, nameless, and uncounted. The suffering of our ancestors is constantly reduced to a statistic. This tells us something. In the great scheme of things within the vast, resource-rich British Empire, their lives and their deaths did not matter. Yet, each death was not just a number. It represented the loss of a beloved mother, a father, a sister, a brother, a son, a daughter, a best friend, or a neighbour. Each death represented a family or a community that would never be complete again. The Irish famine was not inevitable. Famines never are. Our story, our history should teach us to say, never again. There does not need to be famines in a world of plenty. Today, in this beautiful, beautiful museum, we honour our ancestors who suffered so much. This museum helps us to go beyond cold statistics and to imagine the unimaginable. It reminds us that the famine is about people, not statistics. Thank you, President Leahy, for having the vision and the determination to engage on this important project. And thank you particularly to the many artists who brought their skills, their imagination, and their compassion to recreate this painful memory in our important history. Thank you.
Back in 1997, I needed a partner in Ireland to help achieve Murray's vision of attracting to Quinnipiac University some great artwork on the Great Hunger, but also research and educational materials for our library. I was fortunate in 1997 to walk into the Kenny Bookstore and Art Gallery on High Street in Galway City. For those of you who know Ireland, it's the Kenny Bookstore and Art Galleries is truly an institution. I met Conor Kenny that day, along with his mom and dad, who were alive, and his brother Thomas, and I think some other Kennys. But for the past 15 years, Conor Kenny has been my partner, our partner, in identifying works of art, research materials, and educational materials that would be important to accomplish the goal that we had for us. Conor Kenny is here today to give some words. And Conor, will you please come forward?
Thank you, John. Oops, just all of you. And thank you for the kind words. Our son, Alan Thorny na Hearn, Bawatlan Buichas Goal, Le John Leahy, agus a Ferdin Intoch in Ulskol Quinnipiac, as Octa Dakiot. Our Starcha Downa, to Museum an Ghorta Mhóir, Éineach. On behalf of the artists of Ireland, I wish to thank John Leahy and his wonderful team at Quinnipiac University for their patronage. On a world stage, this famine museum is unique. The Kenny family have been selling books and original works of art in Galway for over 70 years. Our father always boasted that we opened the first architecturally designed art gallery west of the River Shannon. My introduction to the business of art was to assist the artist Tim Goulding in hanging the Young Irish Artist exhibition of Rosk in our gallery in 1971. I was 14. It is wonderful to see some of the same artists from that Young Irish Artist show represented in this collection. Over the years, Kenny's have been involved in many different projects, including building collections for the National Libraries of Ireland, China, Australia, the Lenin Library in Moscow, and the Library of Congress in DC. However, none of these projects are a patch on our association with Quinnipiac University. Some 15 years ago, John Leahy walked into our shop on High Street in Galway and, in his usual way, told us in 3 sentences that he wanted to build the best Irish art collection relating to the famine and that he wanted a reference library to back it up. The client had thrown the challenge to the art dealer, who in turn challenged the artist a little bit. But it was a slow, germinating, seed-sowing exercise. As Rowan Gillespie quite rightly says, you cannot produce famine art to order. We took advice from experts in various fields. We went to artists who already used famine imagery in their work and to foster a movement towards representing the Irish famine in artists who hadn't previously visited the famine in their work. These artists work in a variety of media, ranging from 5,000-year-old bog oak to digital technology, and their diversity of material and individual vision provide us with the most comprehensive overview of the famine to be seen anywhere in the world. I am especially pleased that Meg Early, Michael Farrell's widow, who travelled from the south of France to be with us today, is here. We are delighted to see Michael's famine work in this most appropriate setting. John Leahy and the Irish Great Hunger Museum have become significant patrons of the arts in Ireland. Many galleries, auction houses and living artists have been greatly encouraged in recent years, and we admire the vision of Leahy and his team at Quinnipiac. In addition to the arts on the walls and the floors here, Quinnipiac University has begun to scan from its own collections what will become the largest open online collection of 19th century images pertaining to the Great Famine, Irish social history, politics and religion. Our role on this wonderful project has been to act as advisor, protector, provider and sourcer of material for this museum. And we are extremely fortunate, on the advice of Therese Gorry of the Gorry Gallery in Dublin, to have introduced Professor Niamh O'Sullivan as curator of this wonderful inaugural exhibition. Working closely with John Leahy's formidable lieutenants in Lynn Bushnell and Jean Husted, as well as a host of designers, architects and technicians, you will all agree that Niamh has done a magnificent job in what has been a relatively short period of time. I must also thank Dean Kelly, who works with us in Kenny's, whose advice we greatly value and who has coordinated much of the acquisition and shipping of what you see here today, and not least the artists, many of whom have made the journey from Ireland. Quinnipiac University has done Ireland a great service in their work, and we would also like to thank the Lender family who backed John Leahy's vision in creating the first major Irish art museum outside of Ireland. Thank you.
I've allotted a little more time to Niamh O'Sullivan, our curator, so I want to give her an appropriate time, but we're very fortunate to have our U.S. Senator Dick Blumenthal here this evening. He's been a great supporter of Quinnipiac University in so many ways for decades, of course. We miss him because he was our outstanding Attorney General for so many years, and he would be at so many events. And now, while we're thrilled and honored to have him in Washington as our U.S. Senator, we don't get to see him quite as often as he has many conflicting obligations. But I want to introduce him at this time. He's not only a great friend of Quinnipiac University, but he was a great friend of Murray Lender and the Lender family. Please join me in welcoming our U.S. Senator, Dick Blumenthal.
I am really proud and moved and also humbled to be here today. I really want to begin by thanking John Leahy for his extraordinary contributions, not only in this great place of scholarship and learning and beauty, but also in building one of the great institutions of higher learning in the United States of America. Quinnipiac is really a great success story. Thank you, John, for your leadership. I brag about Quinnipiac wherever I go, now in Washington, and I was for many years as Attorney General proud to hire many of the law school graduates. Just so no one is under any illusions, I particularly want to welcome our guests from Ireland, but say to you that among 100 United States senators, as you know, seniority matters a lot. Among 100, I am number 97. So I'm glad you're laughing. Any day I get a chance to say a few words is a good day for me. You know, I am fond of saying on some occasions, particularly on St. Patrick's Day, that today we are all Irish. And today, truly, we are Irish in a very profound sense, I think, in recognizing this museum as a real milestone in the recognition of human rights. The other day, when Jerry Adams was here, he said that the Irish hunger was not a famine, it was a hunger, a great hunger, because it was avoidable and preventable. One of my mentors, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, for whom I worked as a student and then in the government, used to say that everyone is entitled to his own opinions, but not to his own facts. And the facts are, as Ronald Reagan said, the facts are stubborn things. The Irish great hunger was avoidable and preventable for reasons that you've just heard so eloquently said. And it offers a great lesson to all of us that we cannot stand by when there are similar violations of human rights, that we cannot close our eyes or our ears, that we can truly never forget. We can never forget. And we can say here, as again you said so eloquently, Professor, never again, never again. In a global society where we have responsibilities to people across the world, not just in our own backyard, we have a responsibility to prevent and avoid hunger. This museum will be a destination, a national destination. And we ought to be very proud in Connecticut that it's here, that it's in Hamden, that it's part of Quinnipiac, that we have Quinnipiac, and that some of the great scholarship and research will take place here and will enable us as a people, as a nation, to say and to live the principle that we will not allow it to happen again, now or ever. I know, John, that Murray Lender would be, is very, very proud today, and that the bond that you and he lived is truly living here. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, Dick, for those wonderful words. Many of you know I'm a philosopher by training, and I'm always reminded of the Oracle of Delphi, Plato wrote, where Socrates concludes after much investigation that the wise man is the man who knows what he doesn't know. Well, I knew that many of us here know something about trying to run a university. But I also realized that we know nothing about running a first-rate museum, let alone an Irish museum. And as I said, a lot of Irish and Irish Americans contributed to this. But the beauty of this art, the design of this facility, the selection of art among the art that we had in our collection and its representation, all of the captions that are attached to all the artwork, have been done by one person. We were fortunate to, as Connor said, to meet Neve O'Sullivan less than a year ago. She's a distinguished art historian. Aloysius O'Kelly, a research scholar she's an expert on. She was a professor emeritus of visual culture at the National College of Art and Design in Dublin. And she's been here with us now for the past year, and She is truly one of Ireland's treasure. We knew to make this a great Irish museum, we needed a great Irish historian. And Niamh, you've done an unbelievable job. She's been here solely for 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks, nonstop. I was talking to her husband and thanking him for the loan of his wife for the last 2 weeks. This building alone, if you can believe it, on Monday, there was not a single piece of art hung. It was all in her mind. It was all designed. But I hope you'll agree she's done a wonderful, marvelous job in creating this museum. And we very much hope, while she's been the inaugural curator for this dedication, we hope she'll continue in some relationship to continue to help and guide us to build this collection in the months and years ahead. Please join me in welcoming for some remarks, Niamh O'Sullivan.
Well, I can tell you it's a huge relief to see you all here and the art on the wall. Monday was a scary day. We have a very important painting. I say we. We have a very important painting in this gallery, which is called Bad News in Troubled Times, which is just on the wall over there. It's a favourite of John's, and I'm sure sometime he will tell you the story. But I heard some very good news last night. The extraordinary new famine atlas, published by Cork University Press only a couple of months ago, is already outselling 50 Shades of Grey in Ireland. So I think Quinnipiac University is on to something here. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the art and the role of art in telling the story of the famine. The story of the Great Hunger has been mainly told in words by Cecil Woodham Smith, Christine Keneally, Cormac O'Grada, and others, great scholars who have painstakingly interrogated the archive to establish the facts and examine and interpret the famine, the greatest calamity of 19th century Europe. Up to now, and this is what is so important about this museum, no one has addressed the task of bearing witness visually to the famine. Those who experienced the devastation and its terrible consequences did so, at least initially, with their eyes. They saw their food rot in the soil. They saw their homes razed to the ground. They saw their mothers and fathers and children die terrible deaths. They saw their homes recede as they sailed away. They saw America loom into sight. Sights that were etched in memory but seldom found visual expression. For this reason, while much is made of the loss of our native language and the consequent difficulty in speaking of the famine, what is even more striking is the paucity of images contemporaneous with it and after. The Great Hunger haunts art mainly by its absence. It is as if Ireland's artists were traumatized into blindness. But to succeed in art, to give expression to the intolerable, is to triumph, however momentarily, over the nightmare of history. The images in this museum open such doors into, but also out of the dark. Art is no consolation against the injuries of history, but a full engagement with these images fulfills one of the primary obligations of memory, to honor the dead. Like many people here, I studied the famine in school, but as children we were shielded from the full extent of the suffering. It was only when I began as a historian to read contemporary accounts of the famine, many by American humanitarians such as Elihu Burritt, Asenath Nicholson, or Frederick Douglass, that I realized the scale and depth of the poverty of the people. Douglass's sickening description of a human dwelling in Ireland in 1846, and this coming from someone born in a slave cabin, almost beggars belief. One famine story I came across described a family racked with fever going into a graveyard to bury themselves because there would be no one left to do it for them when they were gone. It is important to remember that even if the will and means existed, there were still obstacles to painting the famine. Hunger was not the stuff of art. Those who witnessed it, or survived it, or even just heard of it, would have considered it improper to represent it, to elevate it to the grandeur of art. Art is painted for an elite market, wealthy industrialists, landowners, members of parliament, none of whom would consider purchasing pictures of rotting potatoes, emaciated bodies, or diseased corpses to hang in their homes. Moreover, aesthetic decorum did not allow ordinary people serious treatment in art. But in 1848, the year of revolutions in Europe and the height of the famine in Ireland, the call for political representation for the people also extended to artistic representation of the people, as in the work of Courbet and Millet, for example. Exceptionally, Daniel MacDonald painted his Irish peasant children, and this is one of the few paintings of the period contemporary with the famine, and hence its importance in this collection. That painting is in the downstairs gallery and is really worth looking at. But if painting was out of bounds, it was through pictorial journalism that most people in Britain and America learnt of the famine. The Great Hunger coincided with the birth of mass-produced illustrated newspapers, and here we find the visual record of the famine. No known photographs of the famine exist. In their stead, illustration assumed documentary power and acted as the crucial visual archive of memory. It is for this reason that we have made such a feature of illustration in this museum. In a sense, no one had any interest in the frightful poverty of the Irish population until the famine, when illustrators visualized it for the rest of the world. The loss of life and the guilt of the survivors, the erosion of language and culture, the scarring of the landscape, and the warping of memory remained largely unaddressed in Irish art until the 1990s, when three dominant strands emerged, each richly represented in this collection. A profusion of bronze memorialization, an attempt to face the pain and mourn the suffering and loss endured during the famine years, and a polemical revisualization of causes, effects, and apportionment. With regard to commemoration, the collection has many maquettes for memorials by John Behan, Glenna Goodacre, Robert Shore, and others, providing maps of memory on both sides of the Atlantic. If facing sorrow, anger, and suppression is necessary so that we can begin to acknowledge, understand, and let go, it may perhaps be that indirection and non-figurative art allows the image to go beneath the surface, revealing deeper truths through disfiguration. Think Edvard Munch's Scream. Hughie O'Donoghue, Geraldine O'Reilly, and Alana O'Kelly, for example, explore the significance of memory in their evocative work and remind us that while the past may be over, the work of memory remains to trace its long shadow on the present. Works of record bring us back to Margaret Allen in the late 19th century, but also raise questions of doing justice to the past, as in the work of Michael Farrell, Brian Maguire, and Robert Balla. The German philosopher Walter Benjamin argued that we cannot change the past, but we can change the meaning of the past and reimagine its relationship to the present. It is in this light that we should view the opening of this museum, an attempt to ensure that memory and the imagination themselves would not be the ultimate casualties of the Great Silence. For all these reasons, then, when John Leahy offered me the opportunity to curate this exhibition, I didn't think twice. And it has been an incomparable experience, working with a team that stretched from the west coast of Ireland, picking up with Conor Kenny and expanding the collection, and with Dean Kelly, who scanned for Ireland, enabling us to amass and disseminate what will soon be the definitive collection of 19th century illustration. And with the input of Second Story in Portland, Oregon, tell the story in our unique illustrations wall, which is over here. So this project then was a curator's dream, driven by an institution committed to the best. And for me, this was exemplified by President Leahy's vision and commitment, which has seemed to me electrified so many staff of the university. Working with Vice Presidents Jean Husted and Lynn Bushnell was the best. And as new work was acquired for this beautiful building, renovated by Wyeth Architects, we adapted the space to the art, rather than the art to the space, as is usually the case. In this regard, the remarkable energy, passion, and creativity of Brad Collins, the museum designer, must be applauded. The conception within the building of interesting and challenging shapes and vistas has resulted in an outstanding museum interior that lends itself to telling the story in unexpected, exciting and challenging ways. John Leahy has been so generous in his introductory remarks, but I was only one of a team. I just got to be the bossy boots. I'm sure Mick, my husband, is hoping that it hasn't gone to my head, as he thinks I'm bad enough as it is. The problem is that I've now over-identified, so they may have some difficulty getting rid of me. But I would like to say a word about Grace Brady, the new director, who started, I don't know where she is, I think 9 days ago. I think this is 9 days, is it, Grace? She must have been shell-shocked on day one. But she stood shoulder to shoulder with all of us, architects, designers, carpenters, cleaners, the lot. We were here putting in many long hours, and I can tell you she is 24 carat. This museum is going to be in such good hands, and I so look forward to seeing what she does with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neve. You're eloquent as well. I'm glad to hear you refer to it as a dream. I think for a few moments, a few hours this week, it might have been closer to a nightmare. But the last, when I saw her at the earlier concert today, she said, "It's finished." I said, "You know how long I've been waiting to hear those two words come from your lips?" Thank you, Neve. It's my pleasure now to introduce the Consul General of Ireland, Noel Kilkenny. He's been a great supporter of Quinnipiac, and I've worked with him in many capacities in Irish American activities in New York. He's also responsible in that position for Connecticut, and he and his lovely wife, Honora, who is with us today as well, have visited Quinnipiac in the past, and he very much knew of the early plans, and although this is the first time he's seen the completed building, and I hope he's pleased. So please join me in welcoming Noel Kilkenny, Consul General of Ireland.
Thank you, John. President Leahy, Minister Varadkar, Senator Blumenthal, distinguished guests. John Leahy mentioned that I'm responsible for Connecticut, among other places, and I am. I came here 25 months ago, and I came to the consulate in New York. And I was lucky because going on in the consulate at that time was Ireland's Great Hunger, a small version of this exhibition. So I met John Leahy and I asked him about it and he told me about it. And then at the end of September, so I was only here 4 weeks, we got a quiet phone call, discreet phone call. Murray Lender and Gilly and members of their family would like to pay a discreet visit just to see the exhibit. So we arranged it quietly and I invited them into my room and said, "Listen, I understand that you're involved with this." And I said, "Why?" I said, "I understand you're of the Jewish faith. What is your association with this? Why are you funding an exhibition to do with the Great Irish Hunger?" Now in Ireland we have a Jewish community, largely descended from Lithuanian Jews who were driven out of then Tsarist Russia basically by Christians, Orthodox and Catholics and Protestants and so on. So I asked Murray and the family, "Are you descended from the Lithuanian Jews who came to Ireland?" And they said, "No, we have no connection with Ireland whatsoever." They said, "But John Leahy told us the story of the Great Hunger, and we felt that was a story that needed to be told." And ladies and gentlemen, that is what we have here. Somebody, Murray Lender and his family, Gilly, Marvin and the others, felt that this was a story that needed to be told. But it opens up something else as well, and that is that the role of the Irish and the Jews, because this exhibition in the consulate, a few months before I arrived there, was opened by our president, our last president, President Mary McAleese, on her final visit to the United States. But during that visit, she paid a visit to a temple, a Jewish temple in New York, a temple which sent money to Ireland during the famine. When the rabbi said to his community, There is a community of people in Europe who are starving, and I want to say, I recommend that our community send money to them. Members of his congregation said, but with all due respect, Rabbi, we have very, very poor Jews coming off the ships from Europe, themselves victims of discrimination and in many cases hunger. Why should we reach out to the Irish? Shouldn't we try and help our own who have been so badly treated in Europe? And he said to them, you are right. We have absolutely nothing in common with these people except for our shared humanity. So ladies and gentlemen, if you look around these walls, that rabbi was right. Look around, it's a shared humanity. Those figures, yes, they are Irish. But the first time I saw some of those pictures, tragically, they reminded me of other skeletal figures that we all saw from the 20th century. So I think it's a great credit to the Jewish community in New York, the money they gave to help in Irish famine relief. So ladies and gentlemen, this museum is located here. There are Irish communities in New Orleans, in Butte, Montana, in every state in this union. But I think it's particularly appropriate that the museum, this national museum, is here between the twin centers of Irish America, New York and Boston. And it truly is a national center. I'm about to introduce the Irish minister who will perform the opening. And it's interesting, he came down today from Boston and I came up from New York. And that is what makes this location so appropriate and so wonderful. I saw these plans, John Leahy showed them to me. He brought me around to a building site. Unfortunately, I'm a lawyer. Building plans look like plans. He even showed me mock-ups of what it might look like, but I never dreamt that the reality would be what we see around us here today. So I'm going to introduce the Irish Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport, Leo Varadkar. He's going to open this exhibition. He's been in office for 18 months. And for those of you who take an interest in Ireland today, you'll know that while our problems do not in any way compare with the 1840s and 50s, we are going through difficult times. So I'd like to invite Minister Leo Varadkar to come to the platform and to say a few words. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Varadkar.
Thanks very much. Díomh, Uachtaráin, Cheanador, Guine Uisle, Tamar owner, Dom Van Shaw, Conan Museum Shin, Oscailta, agus Walham Wake, as a gael Don Cura Van Shaw. President Leahy, Senator Blumenthal, Consul General, Cathy Malloy is here representing the Governor, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It really is a great pleasure to be here, and a great privilege, in fact, to be here at Quinnipiac University to represent the Irish government at the opening of the Great Hunger Museum today. First of all, I'd like to particularly acknowledge the artists who put pen to paper, paint to canvas, who put glass and wood and metal together to give life to some of the exhibitions and items that you see on display in this museum. And on behalf of the Irish government, I really want to acknowledge John Leahy, who really is a great Irish American, to acknowledge him for his vision and also his long-term commitment in making this project a reality. I also particularly want to acknowledge this institution, Quinnipiac University, for its interest in Ireland, in our history and our affairs. And like most people in politics, I used to associate Quinnipiac with the Polling Institute. And as you know, politicians are terrified of opinion polls, terrified enough that even on the other side of the Atlantic, we're aware of the Polling Institute. But it is, of course, much more than that. It's an institute of higher learning with schools in all sorts of disciplines. But now also it's home to the largest collection of art related to the Great Hunger in the entire world. And as you know, the famine in Ireland is a seminal and watershed period in Irish history. In many ways, it's to us what the Civil War is to the United States, or World War II was to continental Europe. And Irish modern history really begins with the famine and its aftermath. And as one of the speakers said earlier, at the start of the famine there were over 8 million people living in Ireland. And even today that has only recovered to just over 6 million. We still haven't recovered from the famine. Roughly 1 million died of hunger, and 2 million emigrated during the famine and in the decades thereafter. But in 4 very important ways it's left its mark on the history of Ireland, and also the history of the world, in fact. Because first of all it gave us the Irish diaspora, and millions of people travelled to America, to Canada, to Britain, to Australia, to Argentina, and to various other parts of the world, and brought with them their culture and their music, and infused those nations with a sense of Irishness. And there are roughly now 70 million people across the world who have some Irish heritage. And indeed the main reason for my visit to North America this week is to tell people about our invitation, our gathering next year, to people of Irish heritage to come and visit Ireland. The second thing is that the famine really spurred Ireland's independence and home rule movement. As was said before, there was no shortage of food in Ireland at the time of the famine. Ireland was in fact a net exporter of food, not just grain and corn, but even salmon, oysters, all sorts of things were leaving our ports. And they were leaving our ports to feed an industrialised workforce in Britain, which was then undergoing its industrial revolution. And what that lesson taught Irish people was that you have to be masters of your own affairs to secure the best future for your people and for your children. And that's why within 2 generations of the famine, after 700 years of British rule of one form or the other, Ireland became a nation state and a country of its own again. The third, I think, is probably a connection, rather bizarrely in some ways, to a connection to property, and the sense that Irish people always have for the need to own their home and own their farm. And that probably comes from a fear that if you don't, somebody might take it away from you. And that, of course, has its pluses and minuses, and in many ways you've seen the minuses of that in recent years with our property bubble. But fourthly, and probably most importantly, it taught Irish people about the kindness of strangers. And Irish people did benefit from the kindness of strangers in that period. Roughly 15,000 people from around the world donated to Ireland at that time, including President Polk, who was the president here at the time, Abraham Lincoln, who was a young representative at that time, the Choctaw Indians, who had just survived from their own experience of dispossession after the Tir Trails, and as well in the home of my father in India, the people of Bombay and the people of Calcutta donated to Ireland, to the home of my mother, to Waterford, where people were at that stage suffering from famine. And I think Irish people still understand that kindness, and even now, despite our economic crisis, Irish people still donate to charities overseas, more so than any other nation in the world, and we remain in the top 10, at least in terms of GDP, when it comes to Irish aid. To conclude, the Consul General said that the story of the Great Hunger is a story that needs to be told, and needs to be told again and again. And that story is remembered in a lot of ways. It's remembered in the days of national commemoration that we have in Ireland and across the world, in famine memorials in places like Dublin and Mayo, in the National Famine Museum in Roscommon, and also in some of the ruined houses and abandoned villages that you see if you ever have the chance to visit Ireland. But I have to say that I don't think there are many places in the world that I've been to where the story of the Great Hunger is better told than here in this museum. And that's why it's such a privilege for me to be here to attend the opening. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Noel Kilkenny. I do want to recognize the artists that are with us today, particularly those from Ireland. I think we have almost a dozen of them. This is surely the largest gathering of Irish artists in Hampden, maybe even in the United States. But we're truly honored that they would come to see their works exhibited here. Many of them I've come to know and consider them close friends. But I'll just name them. If they want to raise their hand, that might be helpful for some in the audience who might want to talk with them about their pieces. Bobby Balla, who's responsible for this beautiful stained glass behind me. John Behan, Rowan Gillespie, Joe Hogan, Charlotte Kelly, Brian McGuire, Alana O'Kelly, Geraldine O'Reilly, Parek Rainey, Kiernan Toohey. We also, Neve mentioned that beautiful Michael Farrow piece. Michael we lost some years ago, but we're honored that his widow, Margaret Early, is here. Glenna Goodacre, who is struggling with some health issues today, unfortunately, and but Daniel Anthony, her longtime representative, is here. Margaret Chamberlain is an American sculptress from Massachusetts. We commissioned the Leave Taking, a major piece on the other side of the Farrell painting. Also, I want to recognize Catherine Marshall, art historian from the Royal Irish Academy, who did the video that's downstairs. She also monitored the discussion yesterday with our Irish artist. And I mentioned earlier that the Christine Keneally was really my intellectual awakening with respect to the Great Hunger and the true nature of that tragedy. My awakening with respect to Irish art is Brian and Eileen Burns. The Burns collection of Irish art is, I think, the largest and most substantial and significant collection, privately owned, of the very best Irish art anywhere in the world. In 1998, I had the good fortune, after being Grand Marshal, to get a call from Patrick McCackey, who was the executive director of, there's a small museum down the street from here, just a few miles away, at a college you've probably not heard of, but it's the Yale British Museum of Art. But in any event, Patrick told me they were doing an exhibit of the Burns collection, and he wanted to know whether I would give the opening lecture. And I agreed to do it, even though I was too embarrassed to tell him I was certainly not an expert in Irish art, but I began doing a lot of work, and that collection is just a beautiful collection. And not only did I learn about Irish art, but thanks to Brian and Eileen, I learned to love Irish art, particularly the 19th century and early 20th century, and of course the contemporary art, the Great Hunger. I've come to love the great contemporary artists. Brian and Eileen also made a gift from their collection, and it's in the 19th century West of Ireland Gallery downstairs. It's a beautiful interior scene, aptly called Lest We Forget. Well, I'm so pleased and honored that Brian and Eileen are with us this evening. I'd ask them to please just stand and be recognized. Brian and Eileen Burns. Thank you, Brian. And finally, some of these people have been mentioned, but I want to thank the many people who particularly were involved with the construction and the design and putting this facility together. Trip Wyeth Architects, Bill Hardy and his team from FIP Construction, particularly Dom Madigan and Marco Lanmontagne, a contribution of the French Canadian to this wonderful facility. Marco was really on top of all the details, particularly this past week. Brad Collins, the interior design that Neve mentioned. Joe Rubertone, who just recently retired as our chief facilities officer, is here tonight, but he stayed on with this project just to see it through, as well as Sal Filardi, his successor. I must say, this week when I talked to Neve and she had a look of anxiety on her face, we did our version of the surge on Monday, and we brought in the cavalry and the Marines from the Quinnipiac facilities, and they just did an unbelievable job this final week. So I thank all the facilities people at Quinnipiac as well. Turlo Macano, who's responsible for many of the events that we've had. The wonderful book that you have of the Great Hunger was edited by Turlo. He's been assisting and working with Lynn Bushnell, as just involved in all aspects of this event and the events leading up to it. She's our VP for Public Affairs. David Vallone, I saw him. He's a professor of history who has co-sponsored some Great Hunger conferences with Christine Keneally, and I hope after we get by the opening and into the 2013 year, I'll be pleased to be able to announce that we're also forming a Great Hunger Institute that will be based in our history department, in our College of Arts and Sciences, and David will play a major role in that. Again, continuing the research and education efforts to keep this message alive. Grace Brady, as Neve also mentioned, our new executive director, only here a week and a half, but more importantly, she has spent the last 22 years down at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I have no doubt that she'll develop this as a great, great museum, in addition, a great educational institution. So Grace has been terrific, as Neve mentioned, the past week. Jean Husted, my vice president, executive associate. Nothing happens without Jean, and Jean has been for the past several years, many years. She's been Connor's assistant for acquiring art. She's worked with framers and framing the art. She's been Neve's assistant curator for the past year, and we truly wouldn't be here without Jean. I also want to recognize Patricia Hardy from Irish American Magazine. They've given tremendous exposure to our efforts here, and that's been a very important part of getting the word out about this great museum. Also, we have former Senator Brian McDermott is here. He, in 1997, along with Senator Gaffey, were the two senators who co-sponsored the legislation that we passed in this state to include Ireland's Great Hunger in the curriculum for our young students. And many of them come through our Lenda Family Special Collection Room, and I have no doubt will come through this room as well. And finally, I mentioned earlier, Cecil Woodham Smith, the great book in 1962, the most courageous book on the Great Hunger. To have her daughter here today for this event, let me recognize and ask Elizabeth to please stand. And finally, on behalf of the 1.5 million people who died of starvation and related diseases during the Great Hunger, and the millions more who were forced to leave their beloved island, I want to thank each and every one of you for all that you have done to finally make this building a reality in their honor and in their memory. My thanks to all of you, and I look forward to your continued involvement and support in helping us achieve all the great possibilities that this museum's offer to us. Thank you.